Okay, so can I get a call to order, and I need an approval of the agenda. Grace and Charles, thank you. Declarations of conflict of interest.
Same as before.
Dealing with moving to your new job.
Yeah.
Okay, hearing something new. We need an approval of the previous minutes as well. Kevin? Any comments at all? Okay. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. Based on the Curb Your Enthusiasm this weekend, I don't know if I'm able to wish you a happy New Year or not. If you've seen the episode, you know why. But anyway, Happy New Year. Thanks to everyone for the hard work that they put in over the holidays. That'll be the subject of our discussion shortly. Just a warning to anyone who's joining us that we are going to be in open session for a fairly short period and then move into closed session in order to engage in some discussion that has to be done by closed session. There are some cleanup things at the end that are scheduled when we come out of closed session, but there's not anything that I'd anticipate of a substantive nature. So free to, of course, stay around until we conclude, but I don't expect that there'll be anything afterwards that'll be significant. In any event, thanks to everyone. That's really all I had to say as a start, and we'll throw it over to Christina to lead us through the magic.
Wonderful, thank you, Michael, and welcome back, everyone, to the start of 2020. And thank you, as Michael said, for all the work that was being done over the holiday season as we were through on the supplemental report from the Digital Strategy Advisory Panel. So we have a very light management agenda. Just to give a brief update on the technical review that's gone on and sort of the status of that. A timeline update with regards to the intelligent community guidelines and the process update on that piece. And then just a discussion regarding the panelist mandate sort of timeline. A number of you who are here today actually were appointed 2 years ago, so we just wanted to have a conversation about that process. And of course, I'm joined here today by George Zagar as well, who will jump in and cover part of these as well. So with regards to the technical review that has been ongoing, as indicated, we have gone through an evaluation of the MIDP as amended with the DIA as a consideration. I was informed by the initial review from DSAP, which helped to form the threshold issues resolution. We have left the evaluation window open to get the DSAP review, the second supplemental report, as well as the outcomes of our human rights impact assessment. As of this morning, there was an extension to what had previously been referred to as the March 31st decision date that is now moved forward to May the 20th for our board. So I don't know, George, if you want to talk a bit about the extension or the evaluation.
Yeah, so the reason we were looking to extend it, first of all, we spent a lot of time to analyze the 160 innovations that were in the original MIDP. We tried to narrow that down from, first of all, the perspective of the board, what is it we're interested in, and narrow that down and narrow it down further to what areas would we be interested in potentially putting money in, other areas we might be interested in then pursuing or then pursuing with other government funding. So that was kind of the assessment that we went through. The key that I've been hearing since the beginning when I got here is the compressed timelines. So what we said was, okay, now that we're at this point, we want to share this for the public consultation, which we now scheduled for February 29th. And for us to have public consultation, literally have a week to reflect on that public consultation, to get a report, because we have to give our materials in weeks in advance of the actual meeting for March 31st, because quite frankly, they were right. We would not have had time to properly consider any input out of the public consultation. So to be fair to the public in terms of getting their input and having time to reflect on it, to modify what we would call our first draft of innovation plan to come up with the final innovation plan to go to the board for consideration. We extended that time to May the 20th. So that should be good news, because I know you had some compressed timelines, so this might give you a little bit more time.
It is really good news for us, for our time.
Oh, it was good news for us
Yeah.
too.
And we'll be here later on in the closed session just to help with the drafting of the report by some of the folks that have been helping out with the categorization, the innovation plan, and help to put together the evaluation. So Aaron Barter and Kevin Green will both be here to have a conversation with the report writing working group to share some of the insights gleaned from that as well on a preliminary basis. So you'll hear more about that shortly. Okay, in terms of the intelligent, yep.
Oh,
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
I'll hold on.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm eating. I've made some requests for some of the documents that are in preparation, and whether we'll see request that these have see the documents, the technology assessment, which we got briefed on, which we appreciate, the partnership evaluation, the freedom of information, things that Christina, I've been talking with you for a long time about, and also the CCLA, its response to the CCLA judicial challenge. So I'm hoping that we could see those when they're available. If you let us know when they are.
So I don't know when that's, we'll get back to you in terms of timelines on some of those materials, and I will check. I think the CCLA material is public now that we've filed it, and I'll double check with BLG on that.
Freedom,
Sorry?
and freedom of information.
Oh, the freedom of information. So we still are subject to our own policy where we follow our FOI policy, but there's been no change to our status at this point.
And any progress in changing that status to become?
There's been no update substantively. We can discuss that with the province at our next meeting.
Oh, we have to discuss it with both events and the province.
And the evaluation, the partnership evaluation, that's, I understand that's underway.
Well, that's part of that initial evaluation, so, we'll get back to you on the release of the entire evaluation.
I don't know if I can speak for others, but I think it'd be helpful for our own work to be able to see those various documents.
And we'll take it back to the board.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions before I move to item 2? So with regards to the intelligent community guidelines, we are continuing to advance those internally in terms of drafting, but there are some other adjacent things that are happening with timelines that are impacting when we go out for consultation on those. One of which is our pending the date with the CCLA for the litigation on March the 25th, but more importantly, there are 3 substantive reports coming out from various levels of government that we want to make sure that we're aligned with. One is the report that's actually at executive committee today with the City of Toronto on their digital infrastructure plan, and then we also have the data and digital task force report in the province of Ontario, as well as the expert panel on intellectual property, and your panel's report will also be very helpful. So all of those will feed together. We just want to make sure that we don't end up with something that's completely perpendicular to an emerging policy position from one of our government partners. So we'll come back to you at the next meeting with a revised timeline. The impact may be that there's actually only 1 cycle of market sounding as opposed to 2, which was contemplated originally, but we're still on track to still have a final version of those guidelines in place before December. Any questions?
What is UTIS panel's review? What's it called? What is UTIS panel? What is UTIS panel?
UTIS panel. UTIS work, sorry. UTIS work on accessibility with the province of Ontario. Did you want to touch a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, actually, the reason I wasn't here was because there is a review of the AODA happening at the moment, and there are 2 public review documents that are quite relevant to here. One of them called, so this is the Information and Communication Standard, and then there was we proposed a new legislative framework for that, which is also somewhat relevant.
We being the IRDC or the.
Well, I chaired a digital inclusion task force that informed all of the various topics of the AODA.
Okay.
So there's existing legislation that is being refreshed, but then there's also a new legislative framework for that. I am also involved in the CASDO, which is the Accessible Canada Act, which went into effect, and which is creating standards that will be relevant to this as well. But that wasn't what you meant by that. In addition to that, the IDRC has been engaging community groups in sort of bottom-up reflection on the plans to, rather than following the framework that, as Sidewalk Labs has laid it out, we're looking at it from the perspective of who is it that is intended to be included, that isn't currently included, and what are the questions that arise from their perspective. And
That's the project that they did.
Yeah.
Okay, that we saw. Okay. Or that I saw. I don't think the panel has. But, yeah.
Christina, you said that around the intelligent community guidelines that Waterfront didn't want to be perpendicular to the other policy developments that were going on at the three levels. Do you see that the ICGs will have any other role than just to make sure that you're not, in outer field, so to speak, or do you expect that they will? What role would they play, say, in the examination of the implementation agreements?
So part of it is actually just knowing where there may be some remaining areas where we can improve upon based on the consultation that we've been hearing. Where there have been concerns that maybe policies don't quite go as far as what the public has been concerned. So if there's things that we still could manage through sort of a contractual relationship with a third party, in this case Sidewalk. But considering the ICGs are intended to apply to any vendor that would be doing business in the waterfront, for our waterfront project, we would look at where there's still a remaining gap that we could actually supplement. So it would be supplemental to and build upon the policy framework that would exist.
I see. So the intention would be that that there would need to be compliance. Thinking in the sidewalk proposal case, that it would the agreement or concordance with those guidelines would be done through contract, but in the absence of an actual digital governance framework, digital governance framework that had been formulated and established by any of the levels of government. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe I'll jump in here. So,
Yeah.
It's no different than, on the privacy and any other legislation. They have to abide by whatever law we have.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to drive even further, and therefore, the only leverage we have to get somebody to do things further than the law requires is to tie it to the contractual obligation, right? So that's what we'll do. It's yes, you're going to meet the law, but we would like to go beyond that with certain provisions. You can agree or not agree, but you won't get the contract if you don't agree, right? So that's kind of the only leverage we have.
Right. You've used the analogy of your green building codes.
Yeah.
But given that there is active policy development in this area, and I think a general recognition that the laws that exist now are not adequate for dealing with smart city development, in anticipation of more formal statement by the three levels of government, which at least in the city is not likely to come by the end of the year. I just wonder how you could have the guidelines be sufficient at this point.
Because the provision is they have to meet any requirements, both existing and future. So if there's new requirements that come in, they automatically override what we have existing. So if the city has additional requirements they put in, they would have to meet that as soon as those requirements are.
And the guidelines similarly would be a living document. So as there was new policy positions and new legislation that comes into play, those would be reviewed and updated accordingly, so that it's the highest order of threshold of magnitude that sidewalk would actually be held to in this case. But the risk is really sidewalks and the fact that they're looking at a bit of a landscape right now that's changing and shifting. But regardless, they're going to have to abide by all of it, as George has said.
Mm-hmm. But my concern is that Waterfront Toronto Board, I think, should be able to evaluate the proposal in a way as a whole, or at least as a collectivity, that in a way that's sufficient to meet anticipated standards, because otherwise you'd be you're leaving it up to the individual implementation agreements, as I understand it. Whereas I think that we need to approve that, or I mean, the Waterfront needs to approve that as a whole. And I don't think that by May 20th even, which is a very welcome extension, you're going to be in a position to be able to make that kind of approval to.
So here's the only comment I would make. These submissions and concerns have been raised to the board. They're aware of it. The city's aware of it. We're in dialogue with all three levels of government with regards to where they think they'll be going, and we'll take that into account. But to use another analogy, I know the building code is going to change potentially. I don't wait
Sure.
for all of our builders to stop and say, we know the building code's going to change, so let's wait till the new code comes forward and stop all of that. So I just have to find that right spot
Sure.
for the board, and I think we're trying to do a reasonable job of anticipating what it is, but also putting in the provision that, if there's stricter provisions, they have to abide by the stricter provisions. I think that's all we can do.
Maybe that's something that we, and maybe in our comments.
Yes, I think that's part of the discussion.
That we need to, does that actually get operationalized? Because I was actually thinking of exactly the same analogy around the building code, because we often call for, we need a more fulsome regime and more fulsome legal understanding or environment. And the reality of it is that not everything is going to be perfect and all defined ahead of time. But what might help is if we understand the mechanism with which adjustments might be made given a changing regulatory environment going forward, and how that's actually operationalized through the planning process and the building process going forward.
I think, the one benefit we do have as an organization is, three levels of government are our governance structure. So they're going to want to make sure that we abide by any changes that they have, and they'll work with us to ensure that occurs. So there's almost an extra consideration for us because they're part of our partnership going forward.
I'd just add from my own commercial experience that accepting regulatory risk of change in long-term contracts is pretty normal.
Yeah.
And
Table
having to
stakes.
absorb the expense of that. That's because, particularly in this field where things change, and if you're the vendor, you have to comply and you have to absorb those expenses.
Where it might be a bit different is where the building code analogy might break down is we understand we're in a building code example where it's more organic, that we've got one, we know what it's been over a long period of time. In this case, there's maybe areas that we actually don't have a lot of regulation around. And so we know that it's an area that's maybe parts of it at least are unregulated, and how do we adapt to where there's suddenly, or not suddenly, but there's going to be regulation going forward. So it's a little bit different, but I agree with you that that's
I think
normal on a project.
Chantal would argue we have some very good and long-standing principled regulation that we're building on, particularly in the privacy area, as an example. I mean, and there's improvement needed, but I think to say that there's no regulation.
I didn't say.
I know that, but I think there's a view that we're, there's gaps and lots of legitimate.
I'm referring more to the
criticism.
gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as the governments roll the policies out, people will anticipate what'll come, and businesses have to absorb those risks. That's in my experience. When I was on the vendor side, that's what you had to do it. It was pretty normal.
I'll argue more later about why that analogy has its limits, but I think you're starting on that.
And then the third item is simply around the staff analyst renewal. So as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, there's quite a few of you who actually were appointed that are coming up for your 2-year initial appointment period. So we've been thinking a bit about what that looks like in terms of committee refresh or the time for refresh. And we've spoken with Michael about this matter as well. George, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so, at this point in time, now that we've extended the deadline, my interest would be for continuity as much as possible. So what I've asked Michael, my suggestion is, what I'm going to suggest to the board is that, this is actually a committee of forest management, that I'm approaching Michael about a 1-year extension on existing members, for those who don't currently have an extension, so that at least hopefully we have everybody here till the end of our deadline with regards to the project. And then Michael and I will sit down and look at, what is the structure we want for the future, given we'll have a better idea what the future will hold. So the one thing I have asked Michael to do is to talk to you individually for those who are aspiring potentially, to see if you're interested in staying on or not. But my interest would be to keep you on, and I'll just leave it at that.
Questions? I'll contact people individually offline.
Just for basic understanding, everyone expiring would be the original crew who was here from the beginning. It's the new people that we added later who would be expiring.
Everyone except Karen, Diane, and Kellen.
Okay, great.
And please don't expire. Seems like such a harsh word.
All right.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Nope, that's it.
Okay. All right, with that, if we can get a motion to go into closed session. Grace? Second. All right, so we'll go into closed